Okay, so we got a whole stack of excerpts here from the Feminine Mystique, which I gotta say, this book really made a splash back in '63 when it came out,
Oh, yeah, it definitely shook things up.
for sure. I mean, this whole idea of like women being unhappy, even though they had like the house, the husband, the kids, like the whole American dream thing. It really brought that to the forefront. So that's kind of what we're going to be diving into today.
Right, yeah. Like why that dream wasn't actually, as fulfilling as everyone thought it was supposed to be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we're talking Betty Friedan here, so you know it's going to be good. Now, one thing that really jumped out at me was how Friedan really captures this kind of disconnect, between like the image of what a woman's life was supposed to be like back then and the actual reality.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You have this like picture perfect ideal of the happy housewife, right? Perfectly
Yeah,
coiffed hair, spotless kitchen, smiling away. She's using the latest, like appliances and stuff.
totally. It's like those old ads, where the woman's like, biggest worry is whether her laundry's white enough.
Haha, exactly. And what Friedan does is she kind of peels back that glossy surface, and she shows what's really going on underneath. And through the stories of all these women that she interviewed, like a totally different picture emerges.
Yeah, it's like they had all the stuff, all the material things, but
But they were struggling with this like emptiness,
yeah.
this feeling that something was just missing.
Yeah, and she even calls it the problem that has no name, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Exactly. And I think that's so key because they couldn't even really put their finger on what was wrong.
because like society wasn't really giving them the words for it, right?
Right, like you're supposed to be happy, you have everything you could possibly want. So how do you even admit that you're not fulfilled, right?
And that's kind of the brilliance of what Frieden did, right?
Blech.
Like by giving it a name, she basically gave women this permission to be like, wait a minute, I'm not the only one who feels this way.
Absolutely. It was incredibly powerful, like just to be able to say, "Hey, I have this problem too."
So it's like more than just like boredom or wanting more stuff, right?
Oh, definitely. Like
Hmm.
remember, these women, they weren't lacking in material possessions or anything. What they were missing was something deeper, like a sense of self-actualization, a purpose beyond just being a wife and a mother.
Like their world kind of shrunk, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you think about how, like during World War II, women had stepped up, they were working, doing all sorts of things, and then boom, after the war, it's like, okay, back to the kitchen.
Right, exactly. And that shift back to these traditional gender roles, it was really jarring for a lot of women. Suddenly, all these possibilities that they'd experienced during the war, they were closed off. Education, careers, all that took a back seat to, marriage and motherhood. It was like
Uh-huh.
society was saying, okay, your job's done. Time to go back to where you belong.
And there was real pressure to conform too, right? It wasn't just like a suggestion, it was practically like a mandate almost.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And Friedan, she gives all these really striking examples, right? Like women giving up promising careers to become housewives, pressure to marry young and have tons of kids, colleges even building like dorms specifically for married students.
Wow, it's crazy. Like that messaging was everywhere.
It was this really pervasive message that a woman's place, her only place was in the home.
Like, here's your lane, lady, stay in it.
Yeah, exactly. And this pressure, it wasn't just like societal, it was internalized as well. Women were judging themselves and each other based on how well they lived up to this impossible ideal of the perfect housewife.
Which brings us to like the psychological cost of all of this, right?
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't take a genius to see how all this pressure and these limited roles would lead to
Yes.
some serious mental and emotional strain.
Oh, for sure. And reading some of the accounts in the book, it's honestly heartbreaking. You see women struggling with anxiety, depression, even like unexplained physical symptoms, and it's all just
And often it was just dismissed as like, oh, it's just the housewife blues.
exactly like as if it was just a matter of finding the right hobby or baking the perfect pie.
And the thing that really struck me was how Frieden points out that this wasn't just affecting like a few women here and there. This was widespread, cutting across social class, education levels, even geography. Like this problem with no name was impacting women from all walks of life.
Absolutely. It wasn't just some isolated thing. And that's a key point because it challenges this whole idea that if a woman was unhappy, well, it must be her problem, right? Like some personal failing. But what Frieden showed was that this was a societal issue, a systemic problem that stemmed from the limited roles and opportunities that were available to women.
And that's where the book's real impact lies, right? Like it gave a name to this shared experience, helped women understand that they weren't alone, and like importantly, it challenged the status quo. It forced society to confront this uncomfortable truth that something was seriously wrong with this whole picture of domestic bliss.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. The feminine mystique didn't just describe the problem, it kick-started a conversation, like a whole movement for change. It gave women the vocabulary to finally express their discontent and, I think importantly, the courage to demand something more for themselves.
And it's that something more that I think we need to unpack a bit more. We talked about the limitations, the psychological impact, but what exactly were these women yearning for? Like, what did self-actualization actually look like to them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's something we'll definitely dig into as we keep going with this deep dive. Like, we'll look at the specific ways that this desire for something more manifested and how it really challenged the very definition of what it made to be a woman back then.
All right, sounds good to me. I'm ready to dive into that.
Me too. Let's do it. Picking up on that whole something more idea, one of the things that really hit me was just how much pressure there was to like conform.
Yeah, and it's not even just to, like, be a housewife.
Yeah, right? It's like, you gotta be the perfect housewife.
Oh, yeah, totally. Like, picture perfect.
Exactly. Friedan talks about this whole obsession with appearances. Like
Mhm.
women were constantly bombarded with these messages about staying young looking, keeping a slim figure, having a perfectly decorated home, all while like effortlessly managing the household and kids.
Oh, man. It makes me think of that scene in Revolutionary Road,
Yeah.
where April's, like, frantically cleaning the house before her husband gets home.
Yeah, exactly. Like trying to create this illusion of perfect domesticity.
Yeah, totally. And it's kind of interesting because it shows how this pressure wasn't just coming from men,
I know,
right?
yeah,
That way.
definitely. It was coming from other women, from the media, from this whole cultural narrative
Mm.
that basically said, like, a woman's worth is tied to how well she can maintain this flawless facade.
Which, let's be real, had to be absolutely exhausting.
Oh, totally. I mean, think about it. We're talking about a time before convenience foods, before dishwashers, before all those gadgets that supposedly make housework easier.
Right, like making everything from scratch all the time.
Yeah, and don't forget, this was also a time when women were often expected to be super involved in their communities, volunteering at school, church groups, all that stuff. And still, maintaining this image of the perfect wife and mother.
It's like no wonder so many women were feeling completely overwhelmed and burnt out.
Yeah, totally. There's one excerpt that mentions a study where researchers were actually surprised to find that housewives were more fatigued than women who worked outside the home.
Seriously.
It-
That's pretty wild.
Right. It really makes you think about what we even consider work, right? Like, we tend to think of housework as being less demanding than a traditional job.
Yeah, because it's not like, real work, right?
But when you actually factor in all the mental and emotional labor involved, the constant planning, the organizing, anticipating everyone's needs, it's totally understandable why these women were feeling so burnt out.
Yeah, for sure. And, it makes you wonder, like, what could have happened if all that energy, all that creativity had been channeled into other things, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Friedan talks about this whole idea of brain drain, like this huge loss of potential because so many talented women were basically forced to put their ambitions and intellect on hold.
Right. It's kind of mind-blowing to think about, like, all the women who could have been doctors, scientists, artists, but instead they were.
Yeah, they were stuck in these roles that just didn't allow them to fully express themselves.
There's this anecdote in one of the excerpts about a woman who gave up a super promising career in journalism to become a housewife. And she said it felt like she was living in a gilded cage.
Wow, that's heavy. Yeah, she had all the material comforts, but she was like desperately yearning for something more.
Yeah, a sense of purpose beyond just, taking care of the house and kids.
It's such a powerful image, right? Like being tracked, even though on the surface everything seems perfect. And it wasn't just individual women who were suffering either.
Right, it was like society as a whole was missing out.
Exactly. Like think about all the contributions that were lost because these women weren't able to fully participate in society.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder what kind of world we'd be living in today if those women had been given the chance to pursue their passions.
Oh, for sure. It's a question that Friedan keeps coming back to throughout the book, right? Like, what happens when we limit the potential of half the population? What innovations, what breakthroughs are we missing out on when we fail to tap into the diverse talents and perspectives that women bring to the table?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So we've talked about the problem, the limitations, the psychological toll. But I'm kind of curious now, like, what were some of the solutions that people were proposing back then? Did Friedan offer any concrete ways to address this problem that has no name?
Well, she does offer some ideas, and some of them are pretty interesting, especially when you look at them from a modern perspective.
I bet. I can only imagine some of the ideas that were floating around back then.
Well, one of the more, shall we say, out there suggestions was to actually take away women's right to vote.
Wait, seriously? Like, go backwards.
Yeah, the thinking was that if women weren't distracted by politics, they'd be more content with their domestic roles.
Wow, that's something else. It's amazing how much our perspective on that has changed, right?
It really is. It just shows how deeply ingrained this belief was that a woman's primary focus should be the home. But thankfully, that idea was pretty quickly dismissed as, well, kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, good riddance to that one. What about some of the less extreme solutions?
There were some suggestions about creating mandatory service roles for women, like similar to the military, to give them a sense of purpose outside the home.
That's an interesting one. It's like, I can see the appeal, but it also seems like it's still operating within this framework of like, women need to be given a specific activity, a structured role to feel fulfilled.
Yeah, you're right. It's like they were trying to find a way to channel women's energy and ambition, but without actually challenging the underlying assumption that their primary place was still in the home.
So it's not really about like finding the right hobby or taking a cooking class.
No, it's about something much deeper, right? This
No.
desire for self-actualization, for a life that feels genuinely meaningful and purposeful.
Which, that's a message that still resonates today,
Yeah.
doesn't it? Like, we're still having these conversations about work-life balance, about gender roles, about what it actually means to live a fulfilling life.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes the feminine mystique such a timeless and important work. It sparked a conversation that continues to this day, a conversation about the importance of recognizing the full potential of all individuals, regardless of their gender.
Yeah, it's like she gave us permission to question those scripts we've inherited, those roles we're expected to play, and ask ourselves, does this really fit with who I am and what I want to do?
Exactly. It's about having the courage to say, maybe there's a different path for me. Maybe I don't have to fit into this box that everyone's trying to put me in.
You know, we often talk about the feminine mystique in the context of like the feminist movement, but I think its message is actually bigger than that. You know, it's relevant to all of us, men and women, because it's a call to examine our lives and ask ourselves, am I truly living a life that feels authentic and purposeful?
That's a great point. And Friedan actually touches on that in the book, too. She argues that this feminine mistake, it doesn't just harm women, it harms men as well.
Oh, interesting. I don't think I've heard that take before. How so?
Well, if society is telling women that their only purpose is to be wives and mothers, then it's also telling men that their purpose is to be breadwinners and providers.
Oh, yeah, like the sole provider, the tough guy.
Exactly. And that can create a ton of pressure for men, too. And this feeling of being trapped in a role that maybe doesn't fit with who they really are.
So it's not about men versus women. It's
It's about creating a society where everyone has the freedom to define their own path and contribute their unique talents to the world.
yeah, exactly. Like recognizing that we all benefit when everyone has the chance to reach their full potential, regardless of gender or anything else.
Absolutely.
All right, so as we start to wrap up this deep dive, what's the biggest takeaway for you from exploring these excerpts? And how do you see Friedan's legacy playing out in the world today?
So we've really gone deep with the feminine mystique, haven't we? Talked about the pressures on women, that whole problem with no name thing, and this desire for something more. But now I kind of want to zoom out a bit, look at the bigger picture. Like, what's the lasting impact of this book? How does it still connect to us today, all these years later?
You know, it's pretty amazing when you think about it that a book written like over 60 years ago can still feel so relevant.
Mm.
But I think that really says something about how insightful Friedan was.
Yeah, for sure.
Like she wasn't just talking about some specific moment in time, you know, she was getting at something much deeper, something fundamental about being human, this need to live a life that feels, you know, authentic and meaningful. It's funny because when I first read The Feminine Mystique back in college, I was like, wow, this is pretty dated. You know, it's all about housewives and suburbs and stuff.
Yeah, I get that.
But the more I think about it, the more I realize those core themes, they're still so relevant.
Oh, yeah, totally. Like, the specifics might have changed. We're not all living in identical houses with, like, 2.5 kids anymore.
Thankful.
But that basic yearning, for self-actualization, for a life that aligns with our values and passions, that transcends time and place.
One thing that really struck me was how Friedan kind of just blew apart this myth of the happy housewife. Like, she showed that real fulfillment isn't about fitting into some predefined role. It's about, like, discovering your own path, your own way of contributing to the world.
Right, and it's about realizing that we all have something unique to offer, you
Yeah.
know, regardless of our gender or circumstances. Like, Friedan's work really challenged this very narrow idea of what it meant to be a woman. And in doing so, it opened up possibilities for all of us, I think, to uh, define success on our own terms.
It's like she gave us permission to question those scripts we've inherited, those roles we're expected to play, and just ask ourselves, is this really who I am? What do I want to achieve?
Yeah, exactly. And having the guts to say, you know what, maybe there's a different path for me. I don't got to fit into this box that everyone's trying to shove me in.
It's interesting because we usually talk about the feminine mystique
Mm.
in terms of like the feminist movement, but I think its message goes way beyond that. It's
Mhm.
really for all of us, men and women, because it's this call to like really look at our lives and ask, am I truly living in a way that feels real and meaningful to me?
I think you're right. And Friedan actually talks about that in the book. She says that this whole feminine mystique thing, it doesn't just hurt women, it hurts men too.
Oh, that's interesting. I don't think I've ever thought about it that way. How
Huh?
so?
Well, think about it. If society's telling women their only job is to be wives and mothers, then it's also saying men's only job is to be the breadwinner, the provider, right?
Oh, yeah, I see what you mean.
And that puts a lot of pressure on guys too. And it can make them feel stuck in a role that maybe doesn't fit who they really are.
It's like she's saying we need to like rewrite the script for everybody. It's not about men versus women. It's about creating a world where we all have the freedom to find our own path and contribute our talents.
Exactly. It's realizing that we all benefit when everyone has the chance to reach their full potential, right? No matter what their gender is or anything else.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, what's your biggest takeaway from these excerpts, and how do you see Friedan's legacy playing out today?
Hmm. You know, what really stays with me is just the power of individual voices,
Yeah.
right? Like these women, they felt isolated, misunderstood, but they still had the courage to speak up, to say, hey, this isn't right. We deserve more. And all those voices together, they started a movement that totally changed our society, and they still inspire us today.
It's a good reminder that we all have a voice,
Yep.
that we can all make a difference, even if it feels like we're going against the current.
Right. And sometimes those small acts of courage, they can have a ripple effect that leads to like massive change.
Yeah, for sure.
It's also good to remember that the fight for equality, for self-actualization, it's not over, right?
Sure.
Like we're still dealing with a lot of the same issues that Friedan brought up: work-life balance, gender roles, pressure to conform.
Mm.
But her work gives us a way to understand those challenges, and to keep working towards a better, more just future.
As we've been talking, I keep thinking about that phrase, the problem with no name. And it makes me wonder, like, even today, are there still problems with no name out there? Things that make us feel, unfulfilled, even if it seems like we have everything.
That's a great question to leave our listeners with. And it's something we each got to explore in our own lives, right? Like, what are those messages we've internalized? What expectations are we trying to live up to? And most importantly, what would it take to create a life that truly feels aligned with our values and passions?
I think those are really important questions for all of us to consider. And I hope this deep dive into the feminine mystique has given everyone some, food for thought, some inspiration to maybe question the status quo, and maybe even the courage to start writing our own scripts,
Mhm.
create lives that are really authentic and meaningful.
Yeah, I agree. It's been great exploring these ideas with you. I hope our listeners have enjoyed it too.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep working towards a world where everyone has the chance to live a life full of purpose and joy.